Ready? Perfect. I now call to order this February 3, 2021 public hearing. Before we begin, I invite you all to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeehaw, great looking flag there. Now is the time that has been set to consider an appeal by John Anderson of a decision made by the Department of Transportation and Development related to a request to use certain utility and all-terrain vehicles on public roads under Clackamas County's jurisdiction. No decision will be rendered today. Instead, this hearing will be used for discovery and information for this board to render a decision at a later date. The hearing today will proceed as follows. First, we will consider staff presentation from the county's ADA Title II Compliance Officer, Martine Koblenz, and she is online through Zoom. Second, Mr. Anderson will then have time to present. Next, I will open the hearing for public testimony. Those wishing to testify will have 3 minutes. 4, the board will then ask questions of Mr. Anderson or his representative and of county staff. Assisting us in the hearing today is our clerk, Christina Terwilliger, ADA Title II Compliance Officer Martine Koblenz, and Assistant County Counsels Sarah Foreman and Nate Boderman. Is Sarah here? Oh, hey, Sarah. In attendance today are also representatives from the Department of Transportation and Development. Today we are holding this hearing virtually and in person. If you've joined us on Zoom app for this meeting and you are interested in providing public comment on this hearing only, we will prompt you regarding how to do that when the time is right. The Zoom link and instruction to participate in Zoom are located at www.clackamas.us/BCC. This item is specifically listed under the weekly schedule section at that site. You will have the option of providing your comments to us live during the public comment portion of the meeting. Be sure to include your name and the area where you live. We will now begin the hearing with staff's presentation of the report and recommendation. Staff, go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Martine, thank you.
Hi. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Martine Koblenz, and I'm here before you as the Title II Compliance Officer for today's Americans with Disabilities Act ADA hearing. I will briefly share with you, as it is important that Mr. Anderson has time for him to speak. I'll share with you a summary of what brings us here today, as I know that you've had an opportunity to read the staff report and the attachments. I also want to note that Mr. Anderson has submitted his own materials that you have also received that he will be referencing when he comes before you. The question presented has to do with whether one can safely use the other power-driven mobility devices on county roads as an ADA accommodation, and whether the safety additions to mobility devices as proposed by Mr. Anderson is sufficient to mitigate the safety risks of operating such vehicles on county roads. The ADA states, quote, subject to provisions of this title, no qualified individual with a disability shall, by reason of such disability, be excluded from participation in or be denied the benefits of the services, programs, or activities of a public entity, or be subjected to discrimination by any such entity. The county must provide reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities to allow for access, and those accommodations are weighed against safety requirements in this case. There is more common language about use of mobility devices on pedestrian right-of-way and or within enclosed public spaces. Given that this accommodation request is for use on county roads, it is critical that safety requirements are taken into consideration. And I've put in some relevant ADA language for this case that you can find on page 2 of the staff report. The Department of Transportation and Development has denied use of the other powered mobility devices due to safety concerns. It is my recommendation that the board consider our obligations under the ADA weighed against the safety law and requirements to determine whether Mr. Anderson's proposed modifications sufficiently address the safety concerns as outlined by the DTD ADA coordinator. It is important that we do what we can to accommodate so long as the modifications do not fundamentally alter the nature of the services, and in doing so, we are all in compliance of safety laws and requirements. So we have here our DTD staff and county council as well, and we're available to answer questions and respond to comments. I'll pause here and turn it back to you, Chair Smith. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Nate, are you up next?
Well, if we have just a few moments, I can.
Yes, I would like you to present. I would also like the DTT representative to present today.
Okay.
too.
Well, I'll cover some stuff. And how about if you have specific technical questions for Joe? That's certainly in his wheelhouse. We can do that. And I'll just really amplify and clarify a couple things that Martine just presented.
Yes, go ahead. Please speak loudly.
Yeah. I guess we've got something in front of my mouth here. There are a few things going on here, and I want to make sure that we keep things straight and that we tie it back to the actual legal standard that's at issue here. First off, there's an issue hanging out there with a driver's license, and I'll explain why that's relevant, because federal law provides that no person with a disability may be denied the benefits of services, programs, or activities. Certainly, we consider access to our public roads one of those services that the county provides, very important one at that. Courts have held that the public or the local government is in compliance with ADA if disabled persons have meaningful access to the public body services. There's guidance finding that disabled people that have a driver's license have access to a conventional automobile already have that meaningful access to, in this case, the county's roadways. So this is coming from court cases, not binding jurisdiction, but precedent nevertheless that we've found. Under those circumstances, it's been found that governments are not required to provide any modification. So this acts as somewhat of a threshold question, right? That if we're not, or that if the individual has meaningful access, then no accommodation needs to be made. So that's how that piece is particularly relevant. Certainly in a case like this, where the requested modification would really amount to allowing this individual to have full access to all county roads at all hours, I think it's more difficult to make the case that a reasonable modification is appropriate to allow an individual to access the roads because a meaningful access is already provided through another means. So again, just tying that back, I know that there was some question about the driver's license. DTD raised this in the initial decision materials, and I think there's materials on the record from ODOT indicating that Mr. Anderson has a driver's license. He can certainly clear that up on the record if he'd like, but we are operating under that assumption, I guess we'll say. Moving on, if you find that the individual does not have meaningful access to the county road system, the question then really becomes whether there's a way to modify those statewide prohibitions on general ATV or utility vehicle usage on the roads in a manner that's reasonable or reasonably safe for the individual and others that are using the roadway. Whether an accommodation is reasonable is a highly individualized assessment, right? And so it's not like we can find a court case that's exactly on point and say, these facts are exactly what we have here. We're looking at things like the roads and the vehicles at issue. I think if you read through DTD's materials, they went in depth on, everything from weight differentials of the vehicles to the vertical alignments of the road, the speed, the crash data, so on and so forth. So again, this is setting up that type of individualized assessment that federal law really requires. And time and again, courts have found that modifications that jeopardize public safety are per se unreasonable. So again, I think it's helpful to go back and understand some of the assumptions that staff was operating under when we received this request. We're operating under the assumption that the request is for full access to all county roads at all hours of the day. Joe, in his report from DTD, took a representative sample of roads around what we understand to be Mr. Anderson's address and use those, but again, we're not operating under the assumption that those are the only roads that he has requested to use the ATV or the utility vehicle on. So I just want to make that clear, because if we were to grant the request as proposed, it would be for all county roads at all hours of the day.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
could we limit the roads and the hours of the day?
Well, you know, that's part of the discussion, I think, that you would have with the individual making the proposal. And so if that is a modification that they'd be amenable to, then that's something that could make the proposal, could convert it from something you may consider unreasonable to something that would be reasonable. So yeah, if you want to put those sideboards on it, that's something that we can explore. Let me just briefly touch on this concept of direct threat, and then I can sort of wrap up our portion of the presentation, because this issue was raised specifically. The characterization of direct threat is language that comes directly from federal law. So it's not something that we made up. It's not something that, you know, is sort of a flippant term of use. It finds its definition and its roots in federal law. And direct threat is simply one manner in which a modification may be found to be unreasonable. And so since ADA Title II covers any number of government services, programs, or activities, you'll see this direct threat concept show up in contexts like employment law, in public housing context where you have an individual that is that has specifically demonstrated a likelihood of harming others. Okay. So that's the context that you often see direct threat show up in. Direct threat has also been used, however, by the courts in demonstrating cases like we have here, where it's not the individual per se that's a direct threat, but it's the individual's proposed means of accommodation that constitutes the direct threat, I should say. And I want to be clear that in no way has county staff, and county staff does not allege that Mr. Anderson is incapable of operating his ATV or his utility vehicles on the road as a result of his disability. That's not what the analysis has bared out. Mr. Anderson's disability has not been a consideration at all in any of the analysis to date, beyond qualifying this review here for an ADA analysis. In fact, I don't think county staff is aware of what the basis for Mr. Anderson's accommodation is, and I've advised our staff that we really just don't request that as part of this process. If you read DTD's analysis, it applies to any individual that operates a similar vehicle on the road, regardless of their ability or their disability. That individual operating a similar type vehicle would qualify as a direct threat in staff's opinion under the circumstances. So that's how we understand that to apply in this particular circumstance. So I guess, again, all that to say, I'll end there, ask if there's any questions. If you have technical questions about, the roads at issue, the vehicles at issue, the speed differentials, what we're talking about, Joe's your guy here. But if you have questions about law, I'll do my best to field those. And again, I guess I'll just end by saying, what we found is that time and time again, courts have found that the requirements necessary to ensure safe equipment and operation of motor vehicles properly constitutes what they call essential eligibility requirements, and that local governments are not therefore required to grant modifications that would jeopardize the public safety. And so that's really the basis of DTD staff's opinion here, is that the equipment and the roadways that we understand that these vehicles would be used on are just not conducive to these types of vehicles sharing with traditional motor vehicles.
Thank you, Mr. Boderman. Now I will have Mr. Merrick make his presentation. Do you wish to speak at this time or not?
It's already on.
Oh, I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Anderson, welcome.
Hello, how are you today?
You know what? We're going to go, before you present, we're going to have an opportunity for anybody on the public. Do we have any public folks wanting to comment on this?
No, everybody that's in our attendees list is staff.
Okay, Mr. Anderson,
Yes,
welcome to Clackamas County.
thank you.
Yeah, have you been here before?
Never.
Well, good, it's first time for everything. I'm going to have you go ahead and make your presentation now.
Okay. As I was hearing your council talk about direct threat, I asked council within 3 or 4 emails to please send a letter to the sheriff's department where they notified the sheriff that I was a direct threat by sending them their assessment of my vehicle or my mobility device. What possibly would make somebody involve me by sending a letter to a sheriff's agency that I'm a direct threat with absolutely no proof at all, I will never know. And why they didn't send a retraction to him, I still don't know. It seems very strange that you'd send out the words, Mr. Anderson's a direct threat to others, and they send him this letter. Well, what if the sheriff interprets it wrong? What if he warns all of his police officers that I'm a direct threat to others? I have family that's in law enforcement. I said to him, what do you think about that if it came back to the computer and it said you're a direct threat on the computer? He says, well, I'd be really leery about who you were and how you were acting. I think the overreach there was way too far with the direct threat deal. And I'm very upset about it. You know, it is unwarranted to believe that somebody driving a ATV, a UTV, a tractor, a bicycle, a horse with a 10-year-old on it, or a jogger on a county road is a direct threat to others, which all these things are legal under Oregon state law, every one I spoke of. So if you're a farmer, you can drive this tractor around, field to field, farm to farm. But if you're disabled, the same farmer can't drive his tractor down the road to his friend's house, let's say a mile away, because all of a sudden he becomes a direct threat. I don't think there's any, well, I know there's no evidence, and I just don't even think it is a proper way to think even, in my mind. The direct threat law, which I have supplied you guys with very many Supreme Court cases, has come back to the fact that you are personally, either mentally or physically, a danger to others from something you have done to another person. Not speculation that you might do something or something might happen. That isn't, in my mind, a logical way of thinking. And I want to address some other things that the council said that gets to me. If I have a driver's license, I have access to county roads. But if I'm a bicyclist or a man that owns a horse or a tractor, he also has a driver's license. And he has access to county roads too. But if you're disabled and you have a driver's license, the way it appears in their denial, as they quote, since I have a driver's license, staff has decided that it would be best that I used a vehicle to access county roads. And the one thing that gets to me is this isn't just about county roads. This could be any county property within the county. It wouldn't matter where it is. It wouldn't matter if it was Clackamas County Park. It's the same mobility device. It's the same deal. And when I look at, and you guys have these laws in the small packet this morning of ORS 821-191, operation of class 1, 2, and 3, 4 vehicles. It clearly states in that law that ATVs, UTVs, and tractors have a right to be on any road for farm use or construction use. I don't know what would differentiate me from a farmer, a construction worker, or anybody else that might have legal right to the road. And if you look at the other law, 815-060, standards for slow-moving vehicle signs. This is it. This is a nationwide proof of a slow-moving vehicle that under Oregon state law and every state in America, you have to yield and take care as a driver of a vehicle. This has the right of way, not the driver, not the automobile. This is a flashing amber light that almost every backhoe or tractor in America has on it that accesses any county road in Oregon. I don't understand that I'm being singled out. No, not me personally, I don't think. This isn't about me personally. This is about anybody that would be disabled and would want to implicate the law under the ADA laws. And this all started because I was going from one farm to another. And I got pulled over by a Clackamas County sheriff. And the sheriff says to me, "John, you can't be on the road with that. You know, that's illegal." I said, "Well, okay, I guess. Give me a ticket, do whatever you want to do. The law states I have a right to be here." I knew the law, but he didn't. And his words were, "It is unlawful for you to be operating the vehicle on the road," which really isn't true. I've been going at this now for, I don't know, 6 months, 7 months, something like that. I too have studied many court cases, many laws. And there's also another law, ORS 811-512, unlawfully operation of a slow-moving vehicle on a highway unless it's being used for farm use. And then it's okay. Well, if I was to use this vehicle in a farming manner like I was going from one farm to another, it's perfectly legal. If I'm to use this mobility device as a disabled person, I'm being told it is totally illegal. Under Oregon state law, it is totally illegal. I understand that because nobody in state has set standards for these laws in 11 years. I believe that's how long it's been in effect. 9 years, excuse me. And then when I see the quote about the dangerous roads in the denial of dangerous roads. In general prohibitions against discrimination, I'm going to read it to you because these are things that, as the direct threat, as he mentioned, the council, I believe the council probably has, they have a right to use a direct threat clause if that's what they want to do. I understand that. But I also believe that I'm no direct threat to anybody. Never have been. The one thing that gets me is when I read their denial of my rights. A public entity may not determine the site, location, facility, or make selections that have the effect of excluding individuals with disabilities, denying them their benefits, and otherwise subjecting them to discrimination. So when the county says, "Hey, look, we looked at Karis Road, we looked at Spangler Road. These are dangerous roads." I also went down to the court library down in Salem. Well, the 10 most dangerous roads in Oregon, they aren't out by my house. And even if you guys were to say, well, these roads are dangerous, they're no more dangerous than a farmer that would be using them, or a bicyclist, or anybody else that has public access to the road. And when you think about controlling people. We want to know when you're going to be there. We want to know what road you're going to be on. We don't want to know if it's day or night time. That isn't part of the assessment of a mobility device. I mean, you can make that, I suppose you can make anything you want, you think. But the reality is, nobody has a right to tell anybody that's disabled or farming. I don't believe there's time limits that a farmer can move his tractor. I'm sure he can move his tractor in the middle of the night if that's what he wants to do. I'm sure a bicyclist can bicycle all night long, or a jogger, or anybody else. So to make claims that these roads around my house are dangerous, I don't know. I've lived there 57 years. I can sit at my house and hear the crashes on Karis Road where 213 intersects and nobody puts up a traffic light. I drive down and look at the carnage when all the sirens go down there. Yet the county knows it's a dangerous road. They put it down on the paperwork to me, but nobody does anything about it. So it must not be that dangerous. That, you know, you can't speculate what will happen to somebody. I mean, I could walk out the stairs today and fall on my head, getting into my car and drop dead on the curb. Who knows what's going to happen to somebody? That's life. I believe that the decision was built on speculation. And when they start pulling out the numbers of the roads and the dangers and the distance and the speed, all these things apply to every jogger, bicyclist, horse rider, farmer. They're on the road. Yet, if I use a mobility device, all of a sudden I become a threat to others. And there's no realization that that's going to happen. You know, and you know, I've been at this a long time. Like I said, I've read hundreds and hundreds of pages of law. And when I look at the discrimination factors, as with the county, the public entity cannot decide to lay the facility or the place where a mobility device would be used. It also says that a public entity may not use direct or through contract or other arrangements utilize criteria or methods of administration that would deny me the use of the mobility device, unlike others. And the reality is when you say I have a driver's license and I should use my car, I don't think that's right. I don't think because somebody has a car, they should be denied their rights under federal law, 28 CFR 35137. For the simple reason, what about the guy that doesn't have a car? It is, as I said to ODOT of Oregon, you could be homeless and still have a right to use a mobility device if you're disabled. I would assume. I would assume you could park your mobility device on any piece of county property in Oregon and be legal because it's public land, unless it was otherwise posted. As the Oregon State Beaches have told me, the State Parks Division, you have a right to use that UTV anywhere on the Oregon State Beach, which you can access without hurting protected plants or animals. And I want to go back to page 1 of your guys' reports that was sent there by me. And I'll read it. This is from ODOT of Oregon. ODOT of Oregon was first involved with Clackamas County because I said to ODOT of Oregon, well, I want to have this thing assessed. You know, this is what the law says I need to do. So I want to follow the law. Well, they referred me back to Clackamas County because they said, well, since you're not going to be on a highway, we don't want to assess it. So after I went back to the county and I had the assessment, before it was completed, I said to myself, well, what if I have to cross a highway? That means I'm breaking the law by crossing the highway, because it's a state-owned piece of property. So after months of dealing with ODOT of Oregon, with the same identical requests that I made to the county of Clackamas, and I do mean the same, I just changed the names on my request. There was no difference. It's the same assumption, it's the same request I was making. And this was their answer. I am writing to confirm previous communications regarding your request for assessment of your John Deere XUV. For use as a personal mobility device, ODOT DMV does not perform assessments of personal mobility devices for the use of public right-of-way, including the state highway system. In alignment with federal ADA guidance, ODOT recognizes that other power-driven mobility devices may be permitted for use in areas designed for pedestrian travel. Devices as described in CFR 35.137, other powered mobility devices would include combustible-powered engines such as ATVs. Federal law, CFR 35137, mobility devices, state in part that a public entity shall make reasonable modifications to allow the use of a mobility device, not just on county roads, state roads. It would include parks. It would include any property that was owned by the state or the county, or any private person owning a business. That's why people get to take their mobility chairs into grocery stores. Granted, I don't believe you could take a John Deere Gator into a grocery store. That would be ridiculous. But you could certainly take in a mobility device. And then they go to say, unless public entity can demonstrate that the class of power mobilities cannot operate in accordance with legitimate safety requirements. ODOT addresses this previous communication. The analysis was sent on May 22nd. This analysis includes guidance to mobility devices according to the state laws. You have continued to request of your John Deere XUV and simulatory devices as use as an ADA personal mobility device. This is not a service that ODOT DMV provides. This letter closes your request for assessment. And it doesn't close anything with my request for assessments to the state of Oregon at ODOT, because they refuse to assess it. Even though the state law or the federal law says you shall assess this mobility device. I don't know what to think. Clackamas County, they assessed it. I understand that. ODOT, which is, I consider part of this deal because you guys started off with guidance back and forth between ODOT. I don't know what to think. It's, you know, there's a lot of laws, and some make real good sense, and some don't make very good sense. In Oregon, if you have an electric mobility device, you do not have a right to go on a road that's 35 miles an hour or more. That tells me that every person that lives out in the country that has a mobility device doesn't have a right to go across the road to get their mail. They're breaking the law on their mobility device because the roads are posted at 55 miles an hour. Doesn't make sense to me. I just think that that the direct threat issue, it's not there. The law states the entity shall make a modification to accept the mobility device and apply reasonable safety devices to do it. As I showed you before, this is it. State nationwide known. This is it. Why Clackamas County did not apply these devices, like I said in my email to them, you guys are creating a direct threat by not implicating safety devices on the vehicle, on the device. You know, that's really all there's to say.
Mr.
I-
Anderson, I really appreciate what you have to say today. If you don't mind, I think you've made your arguments, and I think we understand them. What I would like to do at the moment is open it up to my commissioners for their questions, and you may respond.
Sure.
And at the end, I will give you a 2-minute conclusion to make after commissioners and staff weigh in.
Sure.
I
Thank you.
do have a quick question for you for the purposes of identification.
Yes.
I have a photograph of a Gator, of a John Deere Gator, but I don't know if it's your make or model. And here it is. I will have Nate give it to
I don't know.
you. He will bring it down to
Oh, that's
you.
fine, yes.
I want to know, sir, I want to know if this resembles yours, if yours is different or not. It would be most helpful to us.
It resembles mine, but mine has a roll bar,
Okay, roll bar, that's what I wanted to know. That's a safety feature.
and mine has seat belts,
Roll bar, seat belts,
and brake lights, headlights.
brake headlights. Of course, on this one, it's hard to see if it
Yeah, you
has
can't
that or
see
not.
whether it has brake lights or not.
And-
But yeah, it's the same realm, you know.
Okay, good, thank you, thank you. And just real quick, what is the age of your John Deere Gator?
Well, they just got it. It's a 2018, I think.
Oh, wow, okay, and about how many?
This isn't my first Gator. I had one identical to this for 10 years.
That's okay, sir, we're at the.
Okay, go
at
ahead.
whatever we have, today,
That's fine.
yeah, we're not doing in the past, and also hours and mileage,
Oh, I don't know,
so it's fairly new.
300 hours maybe, 200 hours
And,
tops.
and do you conduct regular maintenance on that?
It's maintenance by Pape.
And you take it into them, or do they come out?
They come out and pick it up on a trailer.
And how often is that done?
Whenever
Whenever you call 'em?
The schedule is, yeah.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Scheduled maintenance, that's wonderful, okay. I have more questions, but I'm going to open this up to my commissioners to ask questions
Sure.
of you. Christine?
I do not see any
Not
hands raised.
seeing any questions, really? Okay, well, I'll continue. And you say you have a valid Oregon driver's license, correct?
I do.
Okay, good. And you have other licensed vehicles that you can drive on the roadways that are...
I haven't had a licensed vehicle in 5 years.
You do, how did you get here
I
today?
have access to a vehicle to use.
How did you get here today?
I have access to a vehicle to use.
So you drove it?
Yes.
Okay. Is it on your property, or did somebody bring
No,
it?
it's on our property.
You have access, but you don't own it?
No.
Okay. You say that you travel from farm to farm.
Yes.
Is that the purpose of this Gator, to travel from farm to farm?
This Gator was bought to me by an insurance company as a mobility device for ambulation and locomotion on the farm.
On the farm?
Well, you could say it's on the farm,
Okay, but,
but nobody can say where you're going to use something.
sir,
Yes.
for purposes of clarification, you said in your opening statement that you drive from farm to
Yeah,
farm.
I did, yes.
Okay, for the purposes of farming activities?
Yes.
What farming activities are those?
Well, I was going from our farm to a different farm to help an old man clean up his farm, a 91-year-old veteran. And he asked me, could you come over and help me clean some stuff up? Well, yeah, he's a 91-year-old vet, and of course I can. And besides that, I mean, I go down and I get the mail. I go down to my neighbor's house. Is this really about whether it's a farm device, or is this about whether it's a mobility device?
Well, sir, you opened it up.
I know I
You
did. I have
said-
no problem.
If I'm not mistaken, I'm just going off of what I hear for points
Okay.
of clarification. You mentioned several arguments in your favor why you need the mobility device, and in that you said to travel from farm to farm.
That's what I was doing, yes.
Okay.
That's what I was doing when the sheriff pulled me over.
And which roads do you travel on?
Karras Road, Beaver Creek Road. I've traveled on many roads. Karras Road, I mean, mostly it's Karras Road. Because Karras Road is the front of our farm. I go from one driveway to the other. I get on the farm, I get on the road.
Do you cross the state highway?
All the time.
What hours of the day,
Anytime, day or night.
day or night?
Whatever time I choose.
Okay.
I think these are my rights
No, sir. I'm just
and I'm answering you. I think it's my right to choose what I do
Are you seeking,
24 hours a day as any human being on Oregon or anybody in America.
sir, are you seeking the exception for all hours of the day, 24 hours a day?
Of course,
Okay.
I don't think the law allows anybody to choose
Well,
what time a mobility device will be used.
in the opening statement, if you remember, I asked Mr. Boderman if it was within the purview of this body to limit hours of the day and the roads.
I remember
And
that.
I believe he said yes, and I'm just going on the advice of my counsel.
I hear you,
That's
yes.
what I'm saying with this. That's all the questions I have at this time. I would like Mr. Boderman to weigh in on anything that you heard today.
I guess let me just start out by saying that, this has been going on for 6 or 7 months, and Mr. Anderson and myself and Joe and Martine and a number of staff that have dealt with this, I think we've had a fairly open line of communication. So I hope, just as an initial comment, I hope that none of this is coming across as personal. We talked before the hearing.
No, this isn't nothing about being personal at all. This is what's right and wrong under an ADA law.
Correct, and we do have a difference of opinion as we've been back and forth through emails and before the hearing on interpretation of the law. And as people say, reasonable minds differ on these issues, and this is no exception. I guess the one thing I'll just speak to directly is this, again, characterization of direct threat, because I don't want that to be misinterpreted here, and I think something's getting lost in translation. This is not in any way a personal attack, any comment on a disability or ability in the context of the use of the vehicle on the roads. What we have tried to do is do an analysis based on the safety of the use of that vehicle, not the operator operating that vehicle. And maybe the best way to drive home this point, if I can, I just want to read this passage from a court case, because this is really where we got this direct, or the direct threat defense from, and I think it manifests itself in Joe's material. So I'll just read this. Defendant maintains, defendant would be the complainant in this scenario, maintains that the best available objective evidence that plaintiff's requested modification would pose a significant risk is...
Speak up, Mr. Boderman.
Sure. And sorry, they used a golf cart, and so we're using a golf cart equivalent here, is that his golf cart was manufactured for off-road use and does not conform to the federal motor vehicle safety standards of the United States. Defendant offers evidence that plaintiff's operation of his golf cart, among other vehicles in the requested manner, poses safety risks associated with such things as accelerating and braking, attaining sufficient speeds, lack of windshield wipers, and the effectiveness of the seat belts that plaintiff has installed. Plaintiff has offered no facts to dispute that operation of his cart poses a safety risk to others, or even more significantly, that he intends to limit his use of his cart to specific routes or designated slow-speed areas that would limit the alleged risks. Instead, plaintiff argues that defendant's alleged safety risks are based on impermissible speculation or stereotypes. However, the court says this is not speculative or stereotyping for defendant to assert that due to the significant size, weight, and speed differences between a golf cart and a motor vehicle, plaintiff's golf cart poses a significant safety risk. This is simply not a case in which fears of the possible effects of the requested modification are unfounded, unknown, biased based on disability, or overly speculative. Defendant has set forth undisputed, objective, reasonable evidence of the direct threat to the safety of himself and others posed by operation of plaintiff's golf cart on streets in an unrestricted manner. Again, because plaintiff in this case requests unfettered access, it's impossible for defendant to take steps to mitigate or eliminate the safety risks posed as suggested by the direct threat provisions of the ADA. So again, if that sounds familiar, that's sort of the basis upon which the analysis that manifests itself in DTD's letter really came from. And I guess further to the point, I hope that demonstrates that the direct threat, again, is based on a characterization of the use of the vehicle and not any sort of commentary on Mr. Anderson.
Could you state the nature of that case? Where did it come from?
Yeah, that one is actually, and like I mentioned before, these are court cases from other jurisdictions, so not binding precedent, but instructive. That one is Young v. City of Claremore, Oklahoma. And I have that. We can put that and make that available if you'd like. I have a copy of it here.
And what year was that done?
That one is 2005.
Yeah, please send that over to commissioners, please, for consideration.
So, I mean, again, I guess, you know, if there's specific questions, I'd be happy to speak to that. I guess one more thing. Mr. Anderson's point's well taken, that you know, there is, in state law, allowable use for similar type vehicles to be used in the context of farm use. But I think everyone here is familiar, or at least recognizes that state law makes a number of accommodations for farm use that it doesn't make for the general public. And so, you know, we don't get to, at the county level, institute the traffic laws. That's done at the state level, right? And so we get to enforce. That's where we come in. Our sheriff's office enforces those. But we really do have a limited ability to affect policy as far as what types of users get to use the roadways, bicycles get to use the rights of way, pedestrians get to use the rights of way as long as they're all the way over to the side, I think is my understanding. And that's not a decision that's made at the county level. That's a decision that's made at the state legislature level. And so, you know, there's some flexibility in how that's enforced, of course. But, you know, when we're talking about, you know, the types of policy decisions, you know, that manifest themselves in state law, that's really something that's out of your control. And so it's a point well taken, but unfortunately not something that you have a whole lot of control over here at the county level.
Okay, I'll address that in a minute. Commissioner Schrader is in the queue.
Actually, that's me.
Oh,
Yeah, that's the light. I'm from this station right here.
yeah, and it says Martha.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
because Martha
some-
sits here.
I'm sorry, Chair, the question you asked earlier answered my question about farm
Okay,
use.
Commissioner Salas, please.
Thank you for being here today, Mr. Anderson.
You're welcome.
I know people and worked on persons with disabilities, vehicles, race cars, and so forth. So I know that there are persons with disabilities that are very capable of operating racing and so forth. And I have no qualm. I don't think anyone here has made any assessment of your abilities. I don't think that is the case. The way I read this, and I read all the material, and this is more, I'm going to kind of shift over to Nate here. The materials that cite direct threat, there's a couple references for housing, which are about a person, and one reference to employment, which is about a person, and the court case you're citing is about operating of a particular device. And I think as Nate stated early in his opening statement, that this is about the device, not the person. So if I were to operate the vehicle, I would not be any more safer or threatening. It's still a threat in a sense, or a safety issue in the sense that this particular vehicle does not meet roadway standards or highway standards. I get that. The other part I get is that one of the ORSs you cited states that these are allowed on roads that are up to 30 or 35 miles an hour, I believe, and then there's a different one that doesn't have the mile per hour citing. So I see this as about the device, and I hear and I see in a number of your communications that you're looking at this as a person with a disability. That just means assessment of that. And I think there's a clear, as I read this, a clear distinction between staff trying to say, this is about the device posing a safety threat, not about yourself. And I think that is a clear distinction. So I'm sorry if that has not been clear. And I guess my question to you is, do you understand Mr. Boderman's earlier comments about that? And do you have, I mean, if you can just elaborate how you are making the distinction, or how you are somehow finding this on a more of a personal side versus about the device itself?
Well, when you send a letter to a law enforcement agency and you're alarming them with my name that this is a direct threat situation, and as you just said, in your laws quoted about the 30 and 5 mile an hour allow this vehicle, actually it states right in there 55 mile an hour highways is what it says on one of the laws that the vehicle can be used on. And when you call me a direct threat, when we had the forest fires, I had 60 gallons of water in the back of the Gator with a sprayer pump. I saw 5, 6 sheriffs go by my house at 50, 65 miles an hour, Karras Road. So I got in my Gator and I followed them because I see there's a house on fire over on 213 in Spanger that's burning to the ground. That man was at our house the day I was born. I follow the sheriffs. I catch up to them with my light flashing and my triangle, my headlights and my taillights. And I said, what's going on? Because we're in smoke so thick you can't even see 150, 200 feet with a 30 mile an hour east wind and cinders coming off the backside of Colton. He says, do you got water in that? I said, yeah, I got water. He says, what? I said, what's going on? We're looking for a fire. So I stayed right there on the road. Not one of the sheriffs called me a direct threat to anybody. The whole direct threat thing to me is appalling. As he mentioned about the golf cart, we have a golf cart law in Oregon. If you are disabled, you can use a golf cart on any road in Oregon that's under 35 miles an hour. The problem here is that law doesn't pertain to Oregon that he mentions, because we already have a golf cart law. I don't live on a 35 mile an hour road. I live on a 55 mile an hour road. I've been looking left and right out that driveway for 57 years. Maybe not the first 3 years, but after that I was taught, look left and right. So, when you talk about a direct threat, I feel that I am not a direct threat.
Okay, Mr.
I feel that
Anderson.
maybe I would like to answer the question fully, please.
Yeah, and you
I
have said
feel
that multiple times, sir, and we
had
need to
ample
move on.
time, okay.
I just want a point of clarification. You have quite eloquently made
have
your
what?
case. You have quite eloquently made your case that you are
Oh,
not.
it's perfectly
direct
cut and
threat.
dried, the case.
I have a question for
Sure.
council. Council, it occurs to me that we are to make a decision on this case based on the ADA, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. However, other uses have been brought into mind, and Mr. Anderson, whether to his benefit or not, has brought up the farming and mobility of tractors. Does that apply in this situation?
Well, certainly if he was using those devices for covered farming activities that were exempted under state law, it's not a disability issue at all. It's a,
So are we able then to make the allowance based on farming with restrictions on that, or do we only look at today the disability statutes?
well, you wouldn't need to make an exception because it's already provided in state law. Today, he is allowed to use that device, if I understand, his usage in the law correctly. He can use that today for farming. You wouldn't need to make an allowance at all because it's already provided.
Mr. Anderson, do you have that orange triangle on your Gator?
Yeah,
All right. Do you have a windshield and wiper blades on it?
I'm ordering them.
What?
I'm ordering them.
Okay, good. All
They
right.
have them readily available. May I answer a question to you?
Yes.
Is this really about whether this is a mobility device for farming? It has nothing to do with farming. I think people, maybe this has all been misconstrued, that this federal law has something to do with farming.
No, sir.
And it absolutely does not.
Sir, I'm trying to get you permission, and you just shot yourself in the foot.
No, I didn't. This is a federal law imposed by our government like a civil rights law.
Okay.
This is a civil rights law.
Okay, Mr. Bodeman.
I'm saying that people use these devices as farm vehicles. But I'm
Okay.
also saying that this is a federal ADA law that everybody has to abide by in America.
Okay. If you want to continue with your argument.
I don't think there's anything else to say. I have nothing more to say.
I think I understand where you're coming from, and I think I understand what you are seeking today. You've been very clear. Mr. Bodeman.
Well, after 6 months,
Mr. Boderman.
I have nothing more than to be clear.
Mr. Bodeman. Do you have a comment?
Well, again, we've been operating under the assumption that his request is much broader than just farm use, right? And so again, going back to the original point, if I understand his usage correctly, he could use that utility vehicle or ATV vehicle in direct connection with farming today with no exception. That's covered under state law as long as he meets the other requirements. We understand his request to be much broader than that. He wants to use these devices for personal use that wouldn't be connected with farming. And again, notwithstanding, the disability analysis whatsoever, if a farmer were to use his Gator for farm use, that's covered. If he were to take it to the store for personal use, he'd be in violation of state law. The same thing applies here. What Mr. Anderson's asking for is a waiver of enforcement, essentially, to use that for personal use outside of farming.
Thank you, Mr. Bodeman. Well, any other comments from commissioners at this time? I'm going to close the public hearing, and I will entertain a motion to continue. We have language in our script.
Chair Smith, I move we continue this matter until February 17th and March 3rd at 10:00 in the morning for deliberation and decision only.
I'm sorry, point of order.
Point of order, excuse me.
We would need to choose either February 17th or March 3rd.
Okay, commissioners, do we have a preference on either March 17th or February 17th or March 3rd? Do we?
I prefer March 3rd, thank you.
Okay, let's do it March 3rd. Go ahead, Mark, make the,
Okay? I move we continue this matter until March 3rd at 10:00 in the morning for deliberation and decision only.
Second.
the motion has been moved by Commissioner Scholl and seconded by Commissioner Schrader. Do I hear any other comments on this? Mr. Boderman?
So I guess point of clarification, you have a couple options. You've continued the hearing now, and so we'll reconvene it on March 3rd for deliberation decision only. I guess the question I would have is whether any of the commissioners have specific questions, if we can provide anything further to help you in your
Well, I'm sure-
consideration of this matter, and if you would like to leave that open to anybody to submit. I mean, because
I think we've had the opportunity for public comment on this. However, if any commissioner has clarifying questions, what would be the proper procedure on that?
well, we can leave the record open until a date certain. I think that would be the most, that would probably provide the best process, because
Okay.
if staff submits something into the record, we certainly want Mr. Anderson to have access to that and the opportunity to respond. And so how about, since it's March 3rd, that's a month out, if we have comments due by 5 PM the week before, kind of going on the fly, but that gives enough time
Okay, let's
for,
take a look at the calendar. Hang
February
on.
25th would be the Thursday the week before.
February what?
25th.
Okay. So we have a motion on the table, but Mr. Savas, you're in the queue.
Yeah, just responding to Nate, and I guess I maybe have just a clarification, just make sure I read it right for Mr. Merrick. As I read the material, you had cited the nearby roads with 0 to X amount of feet of shoulder. Is that correct?
That's correct,
So 0 meant 0.
correct.
Okay. I would be curious to know how much linear length, roughly, I don't want you to go out there with tape measures, but just roughly, you might feel of those roads, or a percentage of those roads have 0 or less than the width of the particular vehicle in which we have assessed, or the vehicles which we have assessed.
In terms of the road, so with we'll call zero shoulder, so that means, at the fog line is at the edge of pavement. It's probably 10 to 15% of the rural road system is that way.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I think that, I just want to, just a comment, statement. I thought that the state law and the state's assessment and interpretation of that for a tractor, operation of a tractor, and if a tractor goes on the road, or a combine, or whatever it may be, on the road, it is going, it's not going to go to the store. It's not legal for them to go to the store, the shopping center, wherever it may be. It's only to go for farming purposes, from point A to point B, to access the property and so forth. And that could be wider than even the lane width, as I understand it. In certain cases, some of these farm vehicles are much larger, right? So I just want to just clarify, that's the interpretation that you also have read into this as well.
Yeah, and so as you look at the farm vehicles or farm tractors or instruments of husbandry, they talk about every vehicle designed and used exclusively for agriculture operations and only incidentally operated or moved upon highways. And that comes out of the Uniform Vehicle Code, which is the model for nationally how different devices are defined. With regard to this assessment, because the request was to do an ADA assessment to use a John Deere Gator as an ADA mobility device, I looked at the roadway system in the context of an ADA or a Gator using that roadway system. So thinking about this vehicle that's 5 or 6 feet wide, traveling down the roads at a certain speed, and how it would be interacting with the other vehicular traffic on that roadway.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that has occurred, for example, Oregon's done a lot of work with allowing ATV use, particularly in very rural areas, for connecting to trail systems. And so there was a lot of discussion about where should that vehicle be? Should it be on a facility that is parallel to that highway or to that paved road or on the shoulder? And so one of the assessments I looked at was, if you wanted to make it safer, you would want to separate that slow-moving vehicle from that mainstream of traffic, which means constructing some kind of facility adjacent to the roadway.
Right. So one other thing, and you can answer it or Nate can answer it, and that is that I presume that if there is a farm vehicle that is also approved for highway use, licensed, approved, and designed for highway use and farm use, that we wouldn't have a problem here today, I would gather. I know that's a broad assumption, but is that fair? That if it was equipped and sold as approved for highway use, we wouldn't have a problem here?
Well, I think that the definition is like farm tractor, correct, Nate, or farm vehicle?
I'm not sure what the authorization in state law is for what vehicles are or aren't eligible for use on the highway. I know it's keyed back to the federal, there's a federal safety standard, correct, Joe?
Yeah,
But I don't know how that makes its way back into Oregon law. I don't know how that interacts.
Yeah. And I'm been in that industry majority of my life, and I do know that in order to make something for legal use for highway use, there has to be a significant amount of safety standards in today's world. 30 years ago, those safety standards were completely different. And as it evolves, safety standards have, they've raised the bar. But, I know there are vehicles that are, designed for highway use, but are primarily almost all farm. There's some highway or trucks and so forth that never even see the highway, but are exclusively used on the farm. And so, there's examples of them having mixed use, so.
So Oregon does use the definition farm tractor. And this is an ORS 811.512, talking about unlawful operating low-speed vehicle on highway. And so it does say, notwithstanding subsection 1 of this section, a person does not commit the offense of unlawfully operating a low-speed vehicle on a highway if the person operates a farm tractor on a state highway that has a speed limit or posted speed of more than 35 miles per hour. Under the Uniform Vehicle Code, farm tractor states designed to be primarily used as a farm implement drawing plows, mowing machines, and instruments of husbandry. So there is some borders to that definition.
Okay.
And I honestly don't know if the UTV falls under that. If Oregon defines it as a farm tractor. And that may need a little bit more research.
Right. Well, if you have any, between now and the hearing date, if you have anything to add to that, that any research that can build on that, I think that'd be great, just to help inform us, and I'll go back and study that again, that ORS statute that you cited.
And so you're asking more questions about those different vehicles and their definition of where they can be used?
Only if you feel that there's something there that either we've missed or we could add. And I appreciate, frankly, that the conversation here is about the vehicle, because that's what this is all, I see, this is all really all about. And that's why I'm focusing my questioning along those lines. So if you have anything that, you could find anything else to add, are there cases, are there examples of, vehicles that are retrofitted, whether it's a UTV or it's a Raptor, Yamaha Raptor, whatever it may be, that, is there an outfit, an approved package to outfit that has been legalized for highway use?
Well, many states, including Oregon, have some limited use, allow limited use of those types of, it's a class 2?
It's a UTV, I don't know what class it stands in.
Okay, so there's a certain class of UTV that are allowed, and from state to state, there's different requirements. So for example, the requirements may include headlights, brake lights, as Mr. Anderson has cited. They may include lighted speedometer, mirrors, windshield wiper, a whole plethora of different requirements typical of making a vehicle street legal.
Yeah, and I just said, does that fall under the definition of, meeting legal highway use? And that's a question I just want a really clear,
Well, I mean,
better defined, if you
yeah,
will.
well, and at that point, we remove ourselves from any sort of ADA consideration at all, right? Because the vehicle then is a street legal vehicle that can be
And
used.
if DMV would, I would assume, would license it for that.
No, so when you start getting into that level, now you're getting into EPA laws and US DOT equipment laws. And so things like a UTV, they are not built for highway use. They're not allowed for highway use. The engines are not EPA legal for highway use. The safety devices in the vehicle are not legal for highway use. There was an agreement with the manufacturers and the federal government many years ago, back in the days of three-wheelers, where they agreed, we'll manufacture these vehicles, but they will not be for highway use, which is why when you look at all the owner's manuals in these vehicles and on the vehicles, there are multiple affixed warnings about this vehicle shall not be used for highway use. There are warnings in the manuals. The vehicles have things like non-slip axles, and so if you've ever had your pickup in four-wheel drive on dry pavement trying to drive it, it handles very funny. So these vehicles, technically from an engineering standpoint, they don't handle well on high friction surfaces like pavement because they're not designed to be used on those types of surfaces. And so this is where it gets, I don't know if it's complicated, but there's a lot of moving parts. And I think one of the elements is there's the ADA laws around mobility devices and what can be allowed, and there's also EPA laws and US DOT laws. How do those all fit together as we're looking at a different vehicle to be used as a mobility device on a highway where the highway has requirements for, and standards for what kind of vehicles can use that. Now, tractors are a completely different thing because, and I didn't look into this, but I mean, a tractor, I don't believe is full of warnings that it cannot be used on a highway, because by definition, they can be used on a highway when it's incidental to the farming use. And so it's almost it may be a bit of an apples and oranges comparison.
May I say something?
Yes, Mr. Anderson, go ahead.
If I was on a Segway, is this considered a county road out here?
City Street.
Beaver Creek Road is a county road.
Is
Well,
this a
it's
county
city
road right here?
Says City Street.
It's a city street. Okay, if I was on a county road and I was on a Segway, you guys all know what a Segway is, I take it. I'd be perfectly legal to ride that on any road in the county. Because that's what the law is. That's what the Oregon state law is. If I was on a mobility device, an electronic mobility device, I'd be perfectly legal to ride on any county road that was under 35 miles an hour according to Oregon state law, which has absolutely no EPA standards or any other standards for a vehicle being on the road. And when you talk about tractors, I understand that the UTV I'm using falls into a category of a farm vehicle. And I also understand that when I live on a 55-mile-an-hour road, if I get on my electric mobility device and go down and get my mail, I'm breaking the law because I have no right to be on the road. I don't want to be on the road in an electric mobility chair on a 55-mile-an-hour road. I wouldn't want to be on a bicycle. As the law says, you have to ride with traffic, with cars coming up behind me on a country road at 55 miles an hour. I just, when you talk about the device, I understand everybody's trying to make sense of it. I get that. You know, this isn't personal to me. I'm way past the personal point. It was personal 5 months ago. Now it's a fact of what's the law? And that's all it is.
Mr. Anderson,
That's it.
Commissioner Fisher has a comment or a question?
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure, I know you wanted to
No,
allow an hour, so I'm
no, go ahead. I think we can take as much time as necessary.
asking this question later. But I just want to do a clarification because I'm just doing some of my own legal research here. I just want to say it for everyone that the direct threat is not you. It is, the term direct threat means a significant risk to the health or safety of others that cannot be eliminated by reasonable accommodation.
Exactly.
So, my question for Nate, okay, so this is where this just doesn't make any sense to me. So you're a farmer, you have your ATV, wherever that picture is, that looks like this. You can get in your ATV and you can go on the road and you can go take your whatever, your hay or whatever it is that you're taking over to the neighbors. You can do all that, and that's okay. But somehow, if you have a disability and using this device is how you can go from one place to another, it's then there's a legitimate safety concern that doesn't exist when it's a farm use. I mean, if it was such a legitimate safety concern, and that's where the limits of the ADA are. If there's a legitimate safety concern, sorry, you can't go there. If we cannot reasonably accommodate you, then you cannot, that's just the law. That's sort of a balancing. But I just don't get it. It's just so counterintuitive to me. So what am I missing?
Well, like I said earlier, I think that point is well taken. That, I mean, you have similar types of devices being authorized, or you have one class of device being authorized for a particular type of use on the road, whereas another type of device, we're finding that it's not safe. And you're absolutely right. There's discord there. all I can say is that the Oregon legislature, for one reason or another, has made this carve out for farm use. And like I mentioned before, there's a number of other scenarios in which farm use has received favorable treatment. I don't think that that's necessarily a comment on the safety necessarily. I mean, I think the policy behind there, or at least the assumption perhaps, was that you would have farmers going between their fields that, were on either side of a road, and it would be a fairly limited, constrained use of the county roadways in just moving from one field to another. Again, what we understand this request to be is unconstrained use of any road in the county at any time. So that's not to say that, a farmer couldn't, have farmland, the extreme southern part of the county, and, take his farm implement all the way to another field that he has, somewhere else. I don't think that that's what the legislature envisioned, but that's a possibility. And, you just can't legislate for every scenario out there, right? But I think that the policy, at least, and I'm making some assumptions here, but I think the policy and the allowance in that carve out was specifically with those, adjacent farm units in mind, and that would allow one to go from field to field.
Okay,
Do you
so
have
that
follow-up?
helps. So you're not saying that it's safe necessarily to use the ATV that looks like this on the county road to go from place to place with using for farm uses?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask staff's professional opinion about whether that is inherently safe, you'd probably say no, but there's a lot of things associated with farming that aren't necessarily inherently safe, but we still allow, right? And so, I don't think it's a commentary necessarily on the safety, but the Oregon legislature, again, that promulgates these vehicle rules, has found, for one reason or another, that as a policy matter, they will allow farming specifically to use those vehicles.
Okay, well, that sort of helps, clear as mud, and I think that's why we're here today, is that there are these conflicts within the law. But it would seem that our decision is to evaluate the legitimate safety concern.
The what?
The legitimate safety concern of using the ATV on the county roads.
May I speak to you?
I guess, it's a chair.
Yes, sure, so go ahead. Go ahead.
Are you the chair? You're the chair, is this
I'm
correct?
Chair. Mr. Anderson, please speak freely.
The law states, 35137, mobility devices, that the entity, I'm going to say it again, and I don't understand why nobody can hear it, says that they have to either designate safety items on the mobility device or not. It's their choice to make the modification to be accepted. I can't imagine when I have the safety triangle, nationwide triangle, and a flashing light, nationwide flashing light, like I said, that why didn't the county apply these safety devices to make it safe? It's safe for tractors. I don't understand. It's safe for backhoes. It's safe for any type of construction equipment that drives down a county road. Everybody knows that the triangle is the reason you have to brake and take care as an operator of a vehicle. And then the last statement of the denial says by the county, everybody wants to get home safe. I want to get home safe too. I shouldn't be excluded if I choose to drive down to my neighbor's house and the guy drives by pulling, as this winter, pulling a 30-foot trailer with a Kubota full of Christmas trees that are 6 feet tall. You couldn't even see the Kubota in front of it, and he's perfectly legal. That's all I have to say. I thank you guys.
Mr. Savas, you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to to Commissioner Fisher's question, the way I look at it is it's a difference between farm use and non-farm use. The law allows farm use, okay, and I think maybe what Mr. Anderson's purposes are in the non-farm category. I think that's the distinction. And Mr. Anderson, and you last cited that, and I'm just going to read what it says here. And so it says, "A public entity shall make reasonable modifications." So the word there, reasonable, okay? If there was 6 feet plus of shoulder in the entirety of the area that you wanted to operate in, then it sounds to me like they would be perhaps a different situation, just to some degree. But I'll read the rest of it. A public entity shall make, I'll read all of it. A public entity shall make reasonable modifications unless the public entity can demonstrate that the class of other power-driven mobility devices cannot be operated in accordance with legitimate safety standards.
This is what I'm saying. This is the legitimate safety standards that every tractor or backhoe or farm equipment or machine has on a county road.
Mr.
but-
Anderson, let
but-
Mr. Savas continue.
But-
To answer his question.
Yeah, but the thing here is that I wanted to point out is that demonstrate that the class of other power-driven mobility devices, not the safety issues, but the device, the vehicle itself, no mobility devices, that's the threshold, it appears to me. It's the device.
I've read the law 1,000 times. I got my own set in my own mind what the law means, as council does, as some of you will. We all know that. But to think that a farmer has more rights than a disabled person under a federal ADA law is ridiculous.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Scholl, you have a comment?
Chair Smith, Nate, should Mr. Anderson's request be accommodated by the county? Does that mean the same accommodation would extend across the county to anybody else who's in Mr. Anderson's same situation?
No, the nature of these ADA modifications, the requests, again, we go back to these individual assessments, right? We're looking at the specific types of vehicles, in his case, the roads in which they would be used. If somebody came in on the exact same fact pattern, highly unlikely. There'd be some precedence there. I think you'd probably feel some pressure to find similarly. But no, I mean, I think you take each of these on a case-by-case basis and you evaluate those as they come.
Thank you. And I have a point of clarification. What are we deciding on today or in the future? What is our decision based on? Because I've heard ADA and I've heard farming. Are we only charged with deciding on the ADA and providing modifications for safety, as Mr. Savas says? Or are we able to rule on outside those boundaries?
Well, I guess I would offer that farming isn't particularly relevant in the sense that if he's using these devices for farming activities, he's already exempt, and so there's nothing to waive. There's no modification that needs to be made. Perhaps it bears on your decision, as far as what may or may not be reasonable, to allow, just based on the totality of what he may be using these vehicles for. I don't know. But again, we're operating under the assumption that he wants a modification to allow use of all county roads at all hours, and so that's what we evaluated. And so no, I mean, your charge or the legal standard by which you're trying to measure his request is whether, one, so that threshold question, whether he already has reasonable access to the county road facilities by virtue of having a valid driver's license and access to a street legal vehicle. And two, if you find that he does not, whether we are then required to make a meaningful accommodation in his case, or a reasonable accommodation in his case. It is, again, based on the facts and circumstances.
Okay, Mr. Boderman,
can you
okay,
modify
fine.
it?
Mr. Boderman,
Yep.
is reasonable accommodation only pertain to the vehicle in question, or does it on road conditions and hours of operation?
Well, again, based on the materials that were submitted by Mr. Anderson and the request I understand he is making.
No, yes or no? Just ask,
Well-
yes or no, sir?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Anderson, I'm going to ask you for a second time. Would you accept a decision from this board that would limit your hours of operation?
Absolutely not. I will not.
Okay, that's all I need to
will
know.
not forfeit my ADA rights under civil rights
It's just a
laws.
yes or no question. That's, you know what, you've been very clear.
rebuttal?
I've been trying to help and accommodate us to get to a reasonable decision on this.
The ADA law has already been handed down reasonable.
But yet, somehow, we're here to make a decision. If the
So
ADA law,
you guys need to make a decision.
we are going to make a
It's fine with
decision,
me.
I assure you. And if the ADA law was as crystal clear as it should be, we wouldn't be here today.
Well, it is
Commissioner
that
Fisher.
clear. That's the problem.
I have a question. So if this board decides that it's not, that there's a legitimate safety concern that cannot be accommodated with the use of this vehicle, then what are Mr. Anderson's next steps as far as appealing this decision?
Well, under federal ADA law, he has the right to file a suit in federal court alleging discrimination. And that's always been available to him. This process is not a prerequisite. He doesn't need to exhaust a local remedy in order to have standing in federal court to do that. As far as a circuit court remedy, I suppose, once a decision is made, if it's adverse, he could file a writ of review potentially. I mean, I would leave it up to his lawyer to determine particular strategy, but that would be my guess for a state appeal remedy on this.
I have a question for Joe real quick. Joe, I really appreciated your letter about, the weights of vehicles and, all of this, the issues regarding the safety and how you explain everything. But a lot of it is very technical. And so my question for you is, are the safety standards that Mr. Anderson puts on the ATV, does that remove the legitimate safety concern? Because I'm assuming, let me just give you my assumption, that all the things that you put in that letter are because of the possibility, there's more crashes on those roads, because of the speed of the road, because of the lack of shoulders of the road so that you can't have the vehicle off to one side, the ATV vehicle. Yeah, I guess it's a vehicle, right? So I'm assuming all of that in your analysis. But my question is, does the light, because when I'm driving on the road and there's something that's got the light flashing and all, it's like, dang it, I hate it. I gotta slow down and be here, and unless I can safely pass, which sometimes you can't see down the road to do that. But I'm just curious, do those safeguards protect or remove the legitimate safety concern?
So the factors that I looked at in this case, so when we look at the farm vehicles, they're using the highway incidental to the primary purpose of farming, which means they're not on the highway much. So when we look at the request as an ADA mobility device, when I had the initial conversations with Mr. Anderson, I asked him I said, do you have a particular place where you need to get access to? So a route that I should look at. And Mr. Anderson said, no, I should be able to use this everywhere.
Absolutely.
And so I took a snapshot of different roads in the area where he lived. And so that distinction is important because the more time the vehicle is on the road, the more probability of conflict. So that was kind of the first piece of this. He already had indicated that he had a triangle and, the Gator has lights and some of that stuff, which obviously helps and it's very beneficial and it's appreciated. But the big factors that we deal with in the rural areas, just these incredible speed differentials. A UTV such as his, you're safely traveling at 20 miles an hour, maybe 25 miles an hour. The speed of the vehicles traveling, maybe somewhere, between 45 and 65, depending on the road. And with the type of geometry we have, there's places where that vehicle could drop out of sight. And so that risk is increased by the duration of the trip and the length of the trip. And so I tried to factor that into the assessment. The fact of the matter is we know crashes are rare and random. But still, if they happen, the outcome's going to be very bad. And so I tried to look at it with that lens. And so when we're looking at safety, one of the things we're always trying to do is we're trying to separate the users by the speed, a pedestrian walking at 4 miles per hour and a vehicle traveling at 30 miles per hour. We don't want them in the same space because of those speed differentials. And so, as I think about accommodation, it's like, well, the UTV is operating at a lower speed, to make it really safe, you got to get them out of the stream of traffic. And the other thing I tried to look at is, I think people don't expect to see those types of vehicles on the road. Tractors typically are physically much larger. And so when you see a tractor on the road, you may be able to spot them sooner because they're taller. And obviously, some cases they're extremely wide. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Your answer is no. Correct?
Yes, correct.
Because of all those reasons
Yes.
that you stated.
Thank you.
And is there anything that you could think of that could make it safe? I'm just thinking of the times when it would be out of sight and you're going 55 miles an hour up over a hill, and there it is, and oh my gosh, I didn't have time to stop. I've run into this ATV and we've crashed.
Again, I think about the separation of the users. And so if I were to look at,
So is there any way to make it safe? Like, could you put a super big flag on the ATV? Like people that use the arm bicycles and they have the flag up in the back, could you do something like that to make it safer so it'd be visible?
that probability of conflict is still there.
Right.
It doesn't go away.
So,
So
our standard is legitimate safety
Right.
concern. If we cannot that's the standard. Not that there could possibly be a crash or that there could be some.
Right. Yeah. So when I looked at it, it's like, to make it safe, you should separate it. You should have separated facilities for those vehicles to use.
But you could say that about a powered wheelchair or a scooter or anything. You could say we need to have separate pathways for every type of person that uses any type of mobility device.
Well, in the
But
urban
we
area.
don't have that.
Yeah, and I think this is part of the decision that has to be weighed.
May I address,
Yes, Mr. Anderson.
I want to answer your question
Which
about,
one? I asked so many.
well, the one you asked to the council about,
Legitimate safety concern of your modifications?
well, that stuff that he mentions about the roads and all that, that could happen to anybody on the road. Bicyclists, it doesn't matter. That whole theory doesn't have, there's no logic to it in my mind. I had to come to this hearing so I could proceed under Boley's directions to me that I had to complete this hearing before I could file with Boley a complaint for right to litigate. So that is correct, right?
I'm not sure how,
I can't just go to a federal court and file a case you can't just go to a federal court and file a case for discrimination without a right to sue or a right intent to sue for litigation in a federal court. This is why I'm here. I'm
I see.
hoping that all of you can resolve it. I don't want to be wrapped up in this stuff. All I want to do is go to my buddy's house up the street. And it's come down to this, and I don't really understand it because I've been using the same Gator for 12 years. I've been on these roads using it as a mobility device for years. Not until I got pulled over by the sheriff and he told me it was unlawful for me to be on the road is when I said, well, I can't have this. I can't be getting pulled over by police asking me what I'm doing. It just wasn't working. This is why I put in for the assessment. Everybody knows this. Joe knows it. I told him right up front. This is what's going on, I told ODOT down in Salem, this is what's going on. I just think it's, I don't care if the road's 1,000 feet wide. You see a yellow flashing light in a triangle, you know there's something going on that's not of the normal as traffic. And when you talk about registering tractors and things like that, you can't register a farm vehicle.
No.
It's impossible.
Thank you, thank you. Commissioners, do we have any more comments or questions right now?
Thank you.
There's a motion on the table, and I believe, Commissioner Scholl, it needs to be modified. We have decided on March 3rd, however, comments and questions need to be submitted by February 25th. Can you make that modification to your motion?
Comments need to be,
Comments and questions be submitted to the county by February 25th, and we will continue on March 3rd for deliberation and decision only, at which time no additional testimony will be taken. Is that clear, Mr. Anderson?
That's very clear.
Okay, can you make that?
so move, I
Yes.
so move.
Okay, you so move. Martha, do you second that?
Second.
Thank you very much. There is a motion on the table.
Second.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Schrader. Christina, can you call the poll?
Yes, of course. Commissioner Fisher?
Aye.
Commissioner Savas?
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader?
Aye.
Commissioner Scholl?
Aye.
And Chair Smith?
Aye, the motion passes. I will-
May I ask a question? to
Oh,
Nate?
yes,
A
yes.
Clarification. So I'm just want to clarify, we don't have any ex parte contacts, or if we do, it goes into the record, any information that we receive, correct?
That's correct. And so if anybody reaches out, ask for any comments, refrain to the extent necessary, but if you do talk, if you do make a site visit, if you do anything that would be considered extra hearing evidence, I guess you can say, or evidence outside of the hearing, please disclose that when we reconvene. Thank you.
I just want to say.
Excellent question, excellent question.
I want to thank you all.
Oh.
And I don't want you to feel like there's anything personal about this. You know, I sit here and I get excited and wrapped up about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I told myself, you're going to have to step back and forget who you are. You know what I mean?
Oh, I do.
You got to separate yourself from what's really going on. And I realize this is a field of legality. This isn't my feelings or your feelings. And I just don't want you to feel like, hey, you know, this guy's sitting over here, he's getting a little bit upset. That's, you know, when I walk out the door, I'm going to forget about it.
Well, Mr. Anderson, this sure has been a challenge for us. It's an opportunity for us to grow and consider a subject matter that we have not considered before. I want to thank you for coming today, and with that in mind, I'm going to close the hearing on the ADA grievance and adjourn the meeting.